Think about the last person you spoke to today, a friend, a parent, a colleague. Now think about this. There is a 72-hour window in November 1983 during which none of those people should exist. Not because of a war, not because of a missile launch anyone ordered, but because a military exercise, a rehearsal, was so convincing that the most powerful nuclear arsenal on Earth began preparing to fire back against an attack that had not happened. November 2nd, 1983. NATO launches the most realistic nuclear war simulation ever conducted. Codename, Able Archer, 83. It is designed to last 10 days. By day 5, Soviet nuclear forces are no longer treating it as an exercise. They have loaded weapons onto aircraft. They have moved missiles to forward positions. They are waiting for the order that will end everything. And inside the KGB, one man can see both sides of what is happening simultaneously. He knows how close it is. He knows the West does not understand. And he has 4 hours to do something about it. His name is Oleg Gordievsky. And what he does next is the reason every single person you know is still alive. If you want the full declassified story of the military exercise that pushed the Soviet Union to the edge of launching a nuclear first strike, hit that like button and subscribe to History Unclassified. Every detail in this story is verified. Most of it was classified until the mid-1990s. The man at the center of it was living a double life that would have had him executed if discovered. He was the only person on Earth in a position to stop what was coming, and almost nobody outside an intelligence file knew his name for over a decade. To understand Able Archer 83, you need to understand one man, Oleg Gordievsky, KGB officer, rank Colonel, station, London Residency, KGB, First Chief Directorate. His official role, Senior Intelligence Officer, Soviet Embassy, London. His actual role, the one that nobody in the Soviet Embassy knows about, is something else entirely. Since 1974, 9 years before this story reaches its peak, Gordievsky has been working for British intelligence, MI6. He is the most valuable human intelligence asset the Western Alliance possesses in 1983. He has access to KGB operational planning, internal assessments, and communications that no Western intelligence service could obtain by any other means, and in November 1983, that access becomes the most important intelligence pipeline in the history of the Cold War. Because Gordievsky can see what Western governments cannot. He can see how the Soviet leadership is interpreting what is about to happen, and what he sees terrifies him. But before we get to Gordievsky's 4 hours, you need to understand what the world looks like in November 1983, because it looks nothing like the version most people remember. The textbook version of the Cold War in 1983 is tension, yes, but manageable. Both sides rational, both sides deterred. The classified version, the version that comes out of Soviet archives in the 1990s, is something completely different. In November 1983, the Soviet leadership is not managing tension. They are convinced, at the highest levels in classified internal assessments, that the United States is actively planning a nuclear first strike. Not eventually, not theoretically, soon. And they have a program running to detect the signs of when that strike is coming. That program has a code name, Ryan. In Russian, Raketno Yadernoye Napadenie, translated nuclear missile attack. Ryan is the most aggressive Soviet intelligence operation of the entire Cold War. Launched in 1981 by KGB Chairman Yuri Andropov, the same man who is now in 1983 the General Secretary of the Soviet Union. Its directive is classified at the highest level. KGB and GRU officers at every major Soviet residency worldwide are ordered to monitor specific indicators of imminent American nuclear attack. The indicators are precise: blood bank activity levels in American cities, purchasing patterns at supermarkets near military bases, lights on overnight in government buildings, church attendance patterns, activity levels at American embassies worldwide. The theory behind Ryan is straightforward and terrifying. A nuclear first strike requires preparation, That preparation will leave traces. Find the traces before the missiles launch. Give the Soviet leadership enough warning to strike first. Ryan has been running for 2 years by November 1983. It has generated enormous amounts of data, most of it inconclusive. But the atmosphere it has created inside the KGB and the Soviet military establishment is one of permanent, institutionalized paranoia. Every KGB officer in every Western capital is looking for the signs. Every ambiguous data point is weighted toward the worst possible interpretation, because the directive from Moscow Center is clear. If you miss the signs, the Soviet Union dies. Better to report a false alarm than to miss the real thing. That institutional paranoia is the loaded gun sitting on the table. Able Archer 83 is about to pull the trigger. Now let us talk about what Able Archer 83 actually is, and why it is different from every other NATO exercise that came before it. NATO conducts annual command post exercises simulating nuclear conflict. They have done so since the 1950s. The Soviets know about them. They monitor them. They treat them as routine. But Able Archer 83 is not routine. It is the most realistic simulation of nuclear war procedures that NATO has ever attempted. And the decision to make it that realistic, made by military planners who had no idea what Ryan was or how it would be interpreted, is one of the most dangerous miscalculations of the entire Cold War. Here is what makes Able Archer 83 different from every previous exercise. Previous NATO exercises used fictional countries and fictional conflict scenarios. Able Archer 83 uses real countries, real geography, real command structures. Previous exercises use simplified communication procedures. Able Archer 83 uses actual wartime nuclear release procedures, the real codes, the real formats, the real chain of command for the first time. Previous exercises involved military commanders only. Able Archer 83 involves heads of government. For the first time in any NATO exercise, the participation of actual national leaders is simulated at a level of detail that makes the exercise indistinguishable from a real nuclear release sequence. And it runs from November 2nd to November 11th, 1983. 10 days. The Soviet intelligence apparatus watching Able Archer 83 does not see a military exercise. It sees the following. Unusual radio silence from NATO command networks, consistent with pre-strike communication security. Changes in NATO communication formats, consistent with transition to wartime procedures. The simulated movement of NATO forces through all 7 phases of alert, from normal readiness to general alert to nuclear release, conducted in real time over a period of days. The participation, or apparent participation, of political leadership at the highest level. Every single one of those observations feeds directly into the Ryan analytical framework. Every single one scores as a positive indicator. And the reports flowing back to Moscow Center from KGB residencies across Europe paint a picture that is, to Soviet analysts trained to look for exactly these signs, unmistakable. The Americans are not exercising. The Americans are preparing. Here is where Gordievsky becomes essential. He is inside the KGB London residency. He is reading the Ryan traffic. He is seeing the cables from Moscow Center. He is watching his colleagues, trained intelligence professionals, experienced officers, genuinely conclude that what they are observing is not a NATO exercise, and he is simultaneously aware, through his work for MI6, that it absolutely is an exercise, that there is no American first strike coming, that the entire Soviet intelligence apparatus is in the process of catastrophically misreading a military rehearsal as the real thing. He is the only person on Earth who can see both sides of the mirror simultaneously. And what he sees on the Soviet side of that mirror is not posturing. It is not bureaucratic overcaution. It is genuine, escalating, institutional belief that nuclear war has either started or is about to start. The question is whether he can get that information to the people who need it before the Soviet military stops waiting and starts acting. Let us be precise about what the Soviet military does when it believes a nuclear attack is imminent. Because it is not theoretical. It is documented, and it is happening in real time during Able Archer 83. The Soviet Union maintains what military planners call a launch-on-warning posture. This means the following. If Soviet early warning systems detect an incoming American nuclear strike, the Soviet response does not wait for impact. It launches before the first warhead lands. The logic is brutal and simple. A nuclear arsenal that absorbs a first strike is a destroyed arsenal. An arsenal that launches on warning is a functioning one. Launch on warning means the decision window between detection and launch is measured in minutes, not hours, not days, minutes. And during Able Archer 83, the Soviet military is not in its normal peacetime posture. It has moved. The specific military actions taken by Soviet forces during Able Archer 83 are documented in intelligence assessments declassified in the mid-1990s and in the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board report completed in February 1990. That report, classified at the time, partially declassified in 2015, concludes the following. During the period of November 2nd to November 11th, 1983, Soviet and Warsaw Pact military forces undertook a series of actions consistent with preparation for a nuclear first strike response. Specifically, Soviet air armies in East Germany and Poland were placed on heightened alert status. Nuclear-capable aircraft at forward Warsaw Pact airfields were loaded with weapons, not simulated weapons, live weapons. Soviet submarine forces were directed to increase their operational tempo. Warsaw Pact ground forces received orders consistent with transition to wartime footing. These are not the actions of a military that thinks it is watching a NATO exercise. These are the actions of a military that believes it may need to fight a nuclear war in the immediate future. Now here is the detail that makes this uniquely terrifying. None of this is happening because of a political decision made by the Soviet leadership. Khrushchev is not in the Kremlin. Andropov is. And Andropov is dying. By November 1983, Yuri Andropov, General Secretary of the Soviet Union, the man who launched Ryan, the man whose institutional paranoia about American first strike intentions has shaped the entire Soviet intelligence posture for 2 years, is gravely ill. Kidney failure. He is conducting government business from a medical facility outside Moscow. He is not in full control of the day-to-day decisions being made by the Soviet military and intelligence apparatus. And the apparatus, trained, conditioned, and institutionally primed by 2 years of Ryan to treat any ambiguous signal as a potential attack indicator, is making its own assessments. Without adequate political oversight, without anyone at the top of the Soviet system who is healthy enough and informed enough to say, wait, this is an exercise, stand down. Gordievsky understands all of this. He understands it because he is reading the internal KGB traffic. He understands it because he can see the Ryan reports accumulating. He understands it because he knows the Soviet system from the inside, its institutional logic, its analytical biases, its tendency under pressure to interpret ambiguity as threat. And he understands something else, something that the MI6 handlers he meets in carefully arranged London dead drops do not yet fully grasp. The danger here is not that the Soviet leadership will decide to launch a nuclear strike. The danger is that the Soviet military, operating on institutional autopilot, responding to Ryan indicators, watching Able Archer 83 unfold in real time, will take preparatory actions that are themselves detected by NATO. That NATO will respond to those Soviet preparations, that the Soviet military will interpret NATO's response as confirmation that the attack is coming, and that the two sides will escalate each other into a nuclear exchange that neither government actually ordered, not a decision, a cascade, a self-fulfilling prophecy written in megatons. This is the specific nightmare that haunts nuclear strategists. It has a name, inadvertent nuclear war, not war by choice, war by misunderstanding, war by miscalculation, war because two systems, each one rational in its own internal logic, interpret each other's defensive preparations as offensive ones and respond accordingly, until the point of no return is crossed without anyone ever having made the decision to cross it. Able Archer, 83, is the closest the world has ever come to that specific nightmare. Closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis. Closer than the Petrov incident. Because in October 1962, both Kennedy and Khrushchev knew there was a crisis and were actively managing it. In September 1983, Petrov was one man with one console making one decision. In November 1983, neither side fully understood that the other side was reacting. The West did not know the Soviets had gone to alert. The Soviets did not know the West knew nothing about their alert. Two nuclear superpowers, moving toward catastrophe in parallel, each one invisible to the other. Let us now account for the specific intelligence picture that Gordievsky is building through October and into November 1983. Because the Able Archer crisis does not begin on November 2nd when the exercise starts. It begins weeks earlier, and Gordievsky is watching every step of it. In September 1983, the same month as the Petrov incident, 1 week after the Cal 007 shootdown, Gordievsky attends a classified KGB briefing at the London residency. The subject? Ryan indicators. The assessment presented at that briefing, drawn from Moscow Center analytical reports, is that the probability of an American first strike in the current political climate is at its highest level since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Highest level since 1962. That assessment is not based on specific intelligence about American intentions. It is based on the accumulated weight of Ryan indicator reports from residencies worldwide. Blood bank activity, government building lights, military base purchasing patterns, each one individually meaningless. Together, filtered through a framework specifically designed to find the signs of nuclear attack, they produce a picture that Soviet analysts find deeply alarming. And Gordievsky, sitting in that briefing room, listening to his colleagues discuss the probability of American nuclear attack as though it were a serious operational question, understands something with sudden and complete clarity. The Soviet intelligence apparatus is not analyzing reality. It is confirming its own assumptions. Ryan has created a self-reinforcing loop. Officers are looking for attack indicators. They are finding ambiguous data. They are interpreting ambiguous data through an attack indicator framework. The interpreted data feeds back into Moscow Center. Moscow Center uses it to update the threat assessment. The updated threat assessment goes back to the residencies. The residencies look harder for more indicators. The loop tightens, and nobody at any point in that loop is asking the fundamental question. Are we seeing what is actually there, or are we seeing what we were told to find? Gordievsky passes this assessment to his MI6 contact at their next meeting. The meeting takes place in London in late September or early October 1983. The precise date is still classified. What is known from Gordievsky's own account published in 1995 and from declassified MRR6 assessments is that his reporting at this point represents the first time Western intelligence has a clear internal view of how serious the Soviet misreading has become. Before Gordievsky's reporting, Western analysts knew Ryan existed. They did not understand how deeply it had distorted Soviet analytical judgment. They did not understand that Soviet intelligence officers at senior levels genuinely believed an American first strike was a realistic, near-term possibility. They did not understand that the institutional machinery of the Soviet security state was primed, loaded, and pointed at a hair-trigger interpretation of any unusual NATO activity. Gordievsky's reporting changes that picture completely. MI6 understands the danger. Now they need to make sure the people who can actually do something about it understand it too. That means getting Gordievsky's intelligence to the top of the British government, and from there to Washington. The problem is timing, because Able Archer 83 is scheduled to begin in 5 weeks, and the planners running it have no idea what they're about to walk into. The decision not to cancel or modify Able Archer 83 based on Gordievsky's intelligence is one of the most debated questions in Cold War historiography. The British government received his reporting. The assessment was passed to relevant officials. But the exercise planning was already locked. Military exercises of that scale, involving multiple NATO member nations, thousands of personnel, complex logistics, cannot be canceled or significantly modified on short notice without generating exactly the kind of unusual NATO activity that Ryan is designed to detect. Canceling Able Archer 83 because of Soviet nervousness about NATO exercises might itself be interpreted by Soviet intelligence as a sign that NATO was transitioning from exercise to real operation. The trap was perfect. Any move to reduce tension might increase it. The exercise proceeds as planned. November 2nd, 1983. Able Archer 83 begins. And in Moscow, the Ryan machinery turns its full attention toward what it is watching. November 2nd, 1983. NATO Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, activates Able Archer 83. The exercise begins at the lowest alert level. DEFCON equivalent, normal peacetime readiness. The plan is to walk through all 7 NATO alert phases over 10 days, simulating the full escalation sequence from peace to nuclear release. For the military planners running it, this is a training exercise, a test of procedures, a validation of communication systems, routine. For the Soviet intelligence apparatus watching it, it is something else entirely. Within the first 48 hours, the Ryan reports start flowing. KGB residencies across Western Europe are monitoring NATO communication networks. They observe the following: unusual increases in encrypted NATO radio traffic, changes in communication formats consistent with transition to wartime procedures, activation of command nodes that are normally dormant during peacetime, movement of NATO command personnel to hardened facilities. Each observation is reported to Moscow Center. Each report is filtered through the Ryan analytical framework. Each filtered report returns an assessment that is some variation of the same conclusion. This is consistent with pre-strike preparation. Here is the detail that makes Able Archer 83 uniquely dangerous compared to every previous NATO exercise: the communication silence. During previous exercises, NATO maintained reduced but continuous radio communication on monitored frequencies. Soviet signals intelligence could observe the exercise traffic and confirm it was an exercise. During Able Archer 83, NATO implements for the first time a realistic communication security protocol, extended periods of radio silence, the same silence that would precede a real nuclear strike. Soviet signals intelligence monitors go from observing reduced exercise traffic to observing nothing. Complete silence on frequencies that are normally active. In the Ryan framework, communication silence preceding unusual activity is one of the highest weighted attack indicators. The silence is not proof of an exercise. The silence is proof of nothing. And in the Ryan framework, proof of nothing is interpreted as concealment, and concealment means preparation. By November 4th, 48 hours into the exercise, the intelligence picture reaching Moscow Center has shifted from alarming to acute. The specific assessment, reconstructed from Soviet documents and Gordievsky's subsequent debriefings, is as follows. NATO has transitioned its command structure to wartime procedures. NATO communication patterns are consistent with pre-strike security protocols. Political leadership participation in the exercise is being interpreted as actual political leadership involvement in nuclear release procedures. The Soviets are watching what appears to them to be the final stages of preparation for a nuclear first strike. And they are not sitting still. On November 5th, 1983, Day 3 of Able Archer 83, Soviet Military Intelligence, GRU, issues a flash telegram to Soviet military commands in Eastern Europe. Flash priority, the highest urgency classification in Soviet military communication. The telegram instructs Soviet forces to increase their surveillance of NATO military movements. to report any unusual activity immediately, to be prepared for rapid transition to combat readiness. This is not a routine alert. Flash priority telegrams of this nature are reserved for situations in which Soviet military command believes an imminent threat exists. The telegram is intercepted by Western signals intelligence, specifically by GCHQ, Britain's signals intelligence agency, monitoring Soviet military communications as part of routine Cold War surveillance. The intercept reaches Gordievsky's MY6 handlers within hours. And here is where the story locks into its most dangerous phase, because the people running Able Archer 83 on the NATO side do not know about the flash telegram. They are conducting a military exercise. They have no real-time visibility into how the Soviets are responding. The exercise planners at SHAPE are following their script. Move to alert Phase 4. Simulate nuclear release authorization. Transmit the wartime communication formats. They have no idea that on the other side of the Iron Curtain, Soviet military forces are reading each of those simulated steps as real ones. Two parallel realities, occupying the same 10 days in November 1983. Neither side fully aware of what the other is seeing. Gordievsky is aware of both. He is the single point in the entire intelligence landscape of November 1983, where the two realities intersect. He knows what Able Archer 83 is, he knows what the Soviets think it is, and he knows that the gap between those two things is the most dangerous space in the world right now. His reports to MY6 through this period are the most urgent of his entire 9-year career as a British agent. He is communicating through the standard dead drop system used by his handlers. Packages left at prearranged locations in London, collected by MI6 officers at prearranged times. The system is designed for security. It is not designed for speed, and speed is what this moment requires. Let us now go inside the Soviet military response in more detail, because the flash telegram of November 5th is not the end of the Soviet reaction. It is the beginning. On November 6th, day 4 of Able Archer 83, Soviet air armies in East Germany and Poland received new orders. Nuclear-capable aircraft are to be placed on ground alert. Weapons are to be loaded. Flight crews are to be placed on standby. This is not a drill on the Soviet side. This is genuine combat preparation. Soviet Il-28 bombers, nuclear-capable aircraft that had been in standard maintenance rotation, are pulled from hangars and armed. Soviet MiG fighter-bomber regiments at forward East German airfields stand down from their training schedules. Their pilots are briefed on wartime procedures. Their aircraft are fueled and armed. They are told to be ready. These preparations are observed by Western intelligence, specifically by American signals intelligence assets and by British aerial surveillance. The observations reach the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington. They reach GCHQ in Cheltenham. They reach MI6. And here, finally, the two parallel realities begin to collide. Because NATO analysts looking at Soviet preparations during an ongoing NATO exercise reach a confusing and alarming conclusion. The Soviets are responding to Able Archer 83 as though it is real. That conclusion does not immediately reach the exercise planners at SHAPE. It does not immediately reach the political leadership of NATO member nations. It sits in intelligence channels, while analysts try to determine whether what they are observing is a Soviet counter-exercise or something more serious. The bureaucratic lag between intelligence observation and political decision is, in normal circumstances, an acceptable cost of caution. In November 1983, it is a ticking clock. November 7th, 1983, day 5 of Able Archer 83, the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, a date of deep political significance in the Soviet calendar, and the day on which Able Archer 83 reaches its most sensitive phase. NATO command posts simulate the transition from conventional to nuclear war. The exercise moves through the final alert phases. Nuclear release authorization is simulated using the actual procedures, the real codes, the real formats, the real chain of command that would be used in an actual nuclear war. For the military professionals executing this phase, it is a procedure check, a validation that the system works. For Soviet signals intelligence monitoring every transmission, it is something else. It is the moment the launch sequence begins. In Moscow on November 7th, KGB assessments reaching the Politburo describe the situation in the following terms. Declassified Soviet documents and subsequent testimony from KGB officers present at the time confirm the substance of these assessments. NATO forces are in an advanced state of pre-strike preparation. Communication patterns are consistent with imminent nuclear release. Political leadership participation confirms the operation has moved beyond the exercise phase. Soviet strategic forces should be prepared to execute retaliatory strikes on short notice. That last line. Soviet strategic forces should be prepared to execute retaliatory strikes on short notice. This is not a recommendation. It is a directive. It is the Soviet military machine, driven by 2 years of Ryan conditioning, watching 10 days of the most realistic nuclear exercise ever conducted, formally preparing to fight a nuclear war it believes is about to start. And in London, Gordievsky reads the traffic. He knows what the directive means. He knows what comes next if nothing changes. He has one tool available. His access to MI6, his reports, his ability to tell the West, through the dead drop system, through the careful choreography of a clandestine intelligence relationship built over 9 years, exactly what the Soviet system is doing and why. But there is a problem, a serious one. The dead drop system has a lag. Information left at a drop point is collected at the next scheduled pickup. The next scheduled pickup is not for 48 hours. 48 hours in which Soviet strategic forces are on alert. 48 hours in which Able Archer 83 continues toward its conclusion. 48 hours in which the gap between what is real and what the Soviets believe is real could close in a direction that cannot be reversed. Gordievsky cannot wait 48 hours. He does something he has never done before in 9 years of working for MI6. He breaks protocol. Breaking protocol in clandestine intelligence work is not a minor decision. It is potentially a fatal one. Every procedure that Gordievsky has followed for 9 years exists for one reason: to keep him alive. The dead drop system, the scheduled pickups, the careful choreography of contact with his MI6 handlers, all of it is designed to ensure that the KGB, which monitors its own officers as a matter of routine, never observes a pattern that raises suspicion. One deviation from procedure can be the thread that unravels everything. And for a KGB officer working for British intelligence, unraveling means one thing: a bullet in the back of the head in the basement of Lubyanka prison. Gordievsky knows this. He has known it for 9 years, and he breaks protocol anyway. The specific method he uses to make emergency contact with his MI6 handlers is still partially classified. What is known from his 1995 memoir and from declassified British intelligence assessments is the following. Gordievsky uses an emergency communication channel that exists outside the standard dead drop system. A channel reserved for situations in which waiting for the scheduled pickup would represent an unacceptable risk. The channel is activated. The message gets through. His handlers understand immediately that something has changed. Emergency contact means the situation has moved beyond what the scheduled system can handle. They respond within hours. What Gordievsky tells his handlers in that emergency communication is the most important intelligence briefing of the entire Able Archer crisis. He describes the specific Soviet military preparations, the flash telegram of November 5th, the aircraft loading orders of November 6th, the Politburo assessment of November 7th, the directive to prepare Soviet strategic forces for retaliatory strikes on short notice. He explains the analytical framework driving these preparations: Ryan, its structure, its distortions, the self-reinforcing loop it has created inside Soviet intelligence. He explains why the Soviet system is incapable, from the inside, of correctly interpreting Able Archer 83 as an exercise. because every feature of the exercise that makes it realistic to NATO planners makes it look like the real thing to Ryan analysts. The communication silence, the wartime procedures, the political leadership participation, the progression through alert phases, each one a Ryan indicator, each one scoring positive, each one feeding back into an assessment that is moving in one direction only, toward the conclusion that the attack is coming. Gordievsky's emergency intelligence reaches M1-6 headquarters in London. It is assessed, verified against signals intelligence already collected, and elevated immediately to the highest level of the British intelligence community, the Joint Intelligence Committee, the Cabinet Office briefing room, and eventually, within hours, to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher's response is immediate and decisive. She orders that Gordievsky's intelligence be communicated to the Reagan administration in Washington without delay. This is not a routine intelligence sharing arrangement. This is a direct political intervention by the British Prime Minister in the middle of a live crisis. The intelligence crosses the Atlantic within hours of reaching Downing Street. It lands on the desk of the CIA director. It reaches the National Security Council. It reaches President Reagan. Here is what Ronald Reagan does not know on November 7, 1983. He does not know that Soviet nuclear-capable aircraft have been armed and placed on alert in East Germany and Poland. He does not know that Soviet strategic forces have been directed to prepare for retaliatory strikes on short notice. He does not know that the KGB assessment reaching the Politburo describes NATO as being in the final stages of pre-strike preparation. He does not know any of this because American intelligence, for all its extraordinary technical capability, does not have a source inside the Soviet system with the access and the analytical understanding that Gordievsky possesses. The CIA has satellites. It has signals intelligence. It has technical collection assets of extraordinary sophistication. What it does not have is a human being inside the KGB who can explain not just what the Soviets are doing, but why. Not just the actions, but the analytical framework driving those actions. Gordievsky provides both. And when that intelligence lands in Washington, it changes everything. Reagan reads the intelligence assessment. His reaction is documented in his personal diary entry for November 1983 and in the subsequent recollections of senior administration officials present at the time. He is shaken, not performatively, genuinely. Reagan has spent his presidency describing the Soviet Union as an evil empire. He has authorized SDI. He has presided over the largest American military buildup since the Second World War. He has believed, genuinely believed, that projecting strength was the surest path to preventing war. What Gordievsky's intelligence shows him is something he has not fully considered, that from inside the Kremlin, that strength does not look like deterrence. It looks like preparation. It looks like exactly what Ryan was designed to detect. An America building toward a first strike. Reagan's own posture, the posture he believed was keeping the peace, had contributed to creating the conditions for the most dangerous moment of his presidency. The Reagan administration's response to Gordievsky's intelligence unfolds over the final days of Able Archer 83. It is careful, deliberate, designed not to create additional alarm. The exercise cannot be stopped mid-sequence without potentially generating the exact Ryan indicators that ending it is supposed to avoid. What the administration can do, and does, is begin modifying specific elements of the exercise in ways designed to reduce their ambiguity. Communication patterns are adjusted. The participation of political leadership in the final phases is scaled back. Certain exercise activities that are generating the highest concern Ryan indicators are quietly modified or curtailed. The changes are subtle enough that they do not themselves read as unusual, but they are enough to begin reducing the intensity of the Soviet response. November 11, 1983. Able Archer 83 concludes on schedule. NATO command posts stand down from the exercise alert levels. Communication patterns return to normal. the simulated nuclear release procedures end. From the NATO perspective, the exercise has been completed successfully. Procedures validated, systems tested, training objectives achieved. From the Soviet perspective, something different has happened. The indicators that had been accumulating for 10 days, the communication silence, the wartime procedures, the alert levels, begin to recede. The Ryan reports from Western residencies shift. The activity that had looked like pre-strike preparation begins to look like something winding down. Moscow Center's assessment, which had been moving steadily toward the conclusion that a strike was imminent, begins cautiously to revise. Maybe it was an exercise after all. Soviet strategic forces stand down from their heightened alert status over the days following November 11th. The nuclear-capable aircraft in East Germany and Poland are stood down from ground alert. The weapons are removed. The flight crews are released from standby. The flash telegram instructions are superseded by new orders reflecting a reduced threat assessment. The crisis, which had built over 10 days to a point where Soviet strategic forces were prepared to execute retaliatory strikes on short notice, recedes without a shot fired, without a warhead launched, without a single political decision on either side to go to war. It recedes because a NATO exercise ended on schedule, and because one man's emergency intelligence reached the right people fast enough to make a difference. The immediate aftermath of Able Archer 83 is characterized by something almost as dangerous as the crisis itself: silence. The British and American governments know what happened. They know how close it was. They know the role that Gordievsky's intelligence played, and they cannot say any of it publicly, because saying it publicly means acknowledging that a Soviet KGB officer has been working for British intelligence for 9 years. It means burning Gordievsky. It means his immediate arrest, interrogation, and execution. The people who know the full story of Able Archer 83 in November and December 1983 can be counted on the fingers of 2 hands: Reagan, Thatcher, the directors of CIA and MI6, a handful of senior intelligence officers. That is all. The rest of the world, including the senior military commanders who ran Able Archer 83, does not know how close they came. There is one more dimension to this story that requires telling before we reach the legacy, because Able Archer 83 does not end Gordievsky's story. It accelerates the danger he is in. The more valuable his intelligence becomes, and after Able Archer 83, it is the most valuable human intelligence asset in the Western world, the more pressure MI6 is under to protect him, and the more pressure the KGB is under to find the leak they increasingly suspect exists somewhere in their London operation. By 1985, 18 months after Able Archer 83, the KGB is closing in on Gordievsky, not because of anything he has done wrong, because of a betrayal from an entirely different direction. A CIA officer named Aldrich Ames, who will later be revealed as one of the most damaging moles in American intelligence history, provides the KGB with information that points toward a highly placed British source in the London residency. Gordievsky is recalled to Moscow in May 1985. He knows what that means. The recall to Moscow is the standard KGB procedure for an officer under suspicion. Remove him from his posting. Bring him home. Begin the investigation at a pace and in an environment that the KGB controls. Gordievsky arrives in Moscow knowing that he is almost certainly compromised. He does not know by whom. He does not know how much the KGB knows. He does not know how much time he has. What he knows is this: if he cannot get out of the Soviet Union, he will not survive what comes next. And MI6 has a plan. They have always had a plan. For 9 years, since the beginning of his work as a British agent, there has been an exfiltration protocol sitting in a classified file at MI6 headquarters, a plan for the worst case. The plan has a code name: Operation PIMLICO, and it is about to be activated for the first time. Operation PIMLICO is one of the most audacious exfiltration operations in the history of Western intelligence. It has been sitting in a classified MI6 file since 1976, updated periodically, never used, designed for exactly this moment, the moment when Gordievsky can no longer operate and needs to get out of the Soviet Union alive. The plan is breathtaking in its simplicity and its danger. Gordievsky will travel by train from Moscow to the Finnish border. A British diplomatic car will be waiting at a prearranged location near the town of Vyborg, close to the Soviet-Finnish border. He will make contact, using a specific recognition signal. A British intelligence officer eating a specific brand of biscuit while carrying a specific bag. Gordievsky will walk past. The officer will confirm his identity. Gordievsky will be concealed in the boot of the diplomatic car. The car, protected by diplomatic immunity, will cross the Soviet-Finnish border. That is the plan. It depends on one thing above all else, that the KGB does not know it is happening. May 1985. Gordievsky is in Moscow, under what the KGB describes as routine debriefing. He knows it is not routine. The questions are too specific. The atmosphere is too careful. He is being watched. He can feel it. He has been drugged, he will later confirm this, during a KGB interview session, a chemical agent designed to lower inhibition and encourage disclosure. He says nothing. His training holds. But he knows the investigation is advancing. He knows he is running out of time. He activates the PIMLICO signal, a prearranged sequence of actions in a specific location in Moscow that tells MI6 one thing: get me out, now. The MI6 response is immediate. A team is assembled. Diplomatic cover is arranged. A car is positioned. The operation requires Gordievsky to travel from Moscow to the Finnish border region without KGB surveillance detecting his movements. A journey of approximately 900 kilometers. By train, alone, under his own name, because he is still officially a KGB officer on authorized domestic leave. Any deviation from a normal citizen's behavior will trigger the surveillance he is trying to evade. He boards the train in Moscow on July 19, 1985. He is carrying almost nothing. He has told his wife he is going for a run. He does not tell her where he is going. He cannot. She does not know he works for MI6. She does not know about any of it. He leaves her behind. He leaves his 2 daughters behind. He boards the train. The train journey to the border region takes hours. Gordievsky sits in his compartment, watching the Soviet countryside pass, knowing that if the KGB has identified him, if they know what PIMLICO is, there will be officers waiting at the destination, not to arrest him there, to watch him, to follow him to the car, to take everyone involved. He has no way of knowing whether the operation has been compromised. He has no communication with MI6 during the journey. He is alone with the mathematics of his own survival. He arrives at the prearranged location near Vyborg. He walks to the meeting point, and there, exactly where the plan says they will be, are 2 British intelligence officers. One of them is eating a specific brand of biscuit, carrying the specific bag, the recognition signal. Gordievsky walks past. Eye contact. Confirmation. He is guided to the diplomatic car. He climbs into the boot. The lid closes. The car moves toward the Soviet-Finnish border, crossing at Valama. Inside the boot, Gordievsky lies still. The car crosses through Soviet territory. It approaches the border checkpoint. The guards examine the diplomatic vehicle. They check the documentation. Standard procedure for a diplomatic car would normally exempt it from physical search. But these are not normal circumstances. The guards are thorough. One of them brings a dog, a trained search dog, designed to detect, among other things, human presence in concealed spaces. The dog works along the car. It reaches the boot. It pauses. Gordievsky, lying motionless in the darkness, is inches from the dog on the other side of the metal. The dog moves on. The car is cleared. It crosses the border into Finland. Gordievsky is extracted from the boot of the car on the Finnish side of the border. He is alive. He is free. Operation PIMLICO, 9 years in preparation, 4 months from activation to execution, has worked. The most valuable intelligence asset in the Western world is out of the Soviet Union. he will never return. The intelligence that Gordievsky provides in his post-exfiltration debriefings, conducted over months by MI6 and CIA, is described by senior intelligence officials on both sides of the Atlantic as transformational. He provides a complete picture of KGB operations in Britain and across Western Europe. He identifies Soviet agents and sources. He describes the internal workings of the KGB First Chief Directorate in a level of detail that has never been available to Western intelligence. And he provides the definitive account of Ryan, of the analytical framework that drove the Soviet misreading of Able Archer 83, of how close the world came in November 1983 to an inadvertent nuclear war that nobody ordered. That account, combined with the intelligence he provided during the crisis itself, shapes Western understanding of Soviet nuclear doctrine for the remainder of the Cold War. The full declassification of the Able Archer 83 story happens in stages. The President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board completes its classified assessment in February 1990. That report concludes, in language that remains partially redacted even in its 2015 public release, that the Able Archer 83 exercise had posed a genuine risk of triggering a Soviet nuclear response. Not theoretical, genuine. The report credits intelligence from a sensitive human source, Gordievsky, not named, as having been critical to understanding and managing that risk. Gordievsky publishes his memoir in 1995. Next stop, execution. It is the first time the full story of PIMLICO and his role during Able Archer 83 reaches a public audience. Reagan's response to Able Archer 83 is one of the least discussed but most significant turning points of his presidency. In his diary and in subsequent interviews, he describes the intelligence he received about Soviet fears as genuinely alarming. He had not understood, had not been briefed to understand, that his own administration's posture was being interpreted in Moscow as preparation for a first strike. The experience of Able Archer 83 directly influences the evolution of Reagan's approach to the Soviet Union in 1984 and 1985. His famous speech in January 1984, in which he speaks directly to the Soviet people and describes a vision of ordinary Americans and Soviets finding common ground, is partly a response to what he learned from Gordievsky's intelligence. The arms control negotiations that eventually produced the INF Treaty in 1987, the first agreement to actually eliminate an entire class of nuclear weapons, are shaped in part by the understanding that miscalculation, not malice, is the most likely path to nuclear war. That understanding came from Able Archer 83. That understanding came from Gordievsky. Here is the final accounting. Able Archer 83 runs from November 2nd to November 11th, 1983. 10 days. During those 10 days, Soviet nuclear-capable aircraft in East Germany and Poland are armed and placed on ground alert. Soviet strategic forces are directed to prepare for retaliatory strikes on short notice. The KGB analytical assessment reaching the Politburo describes NATO as being in the final stages of pre-strike preparation. The world is closer to inadvertent nuclear war than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Possibly closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the mechanism that prevents the cascade from completing is a single human intelligence source, one KGB officer, working for MI6 for 9 years, reading both sides of the mirror simultaneously, and breaking protocol when breaking protocol is the only option left. Oleg Gordievsky receives the CMG, Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, from the British government. He is granted British citizenship. He settles in the United Kingdom, where he lives to this day. His wife and daughters were permitted to leave the Soviet Union and join him in 1991, 6 years after his exfiltration. 6 years. He did not see them during that time. He does not speak about those 6 years in detail. The KGB sentenced him to death in absentia in 1985. That sentence has never been formally rescinded. The Soviet Union collapses on December 25, 1991. the Ryan program, ends with it. The KGB is dissolved and reconstituted as the FSB and SVR. The files on Able Archer 83 begin to open, slowly, partially, incompletely, through the 1990s. What they reveal confirms everything Gordievsky reported in real time. The Soviet military had moved. The preparations were real. The danger was real. The world came as close as it has ever come to an inadvertent nuclear war during 10 days in November 1983. And the reason it did not happen is sitting in a house in Britain, collecting a pension. Still, officially, under a Soviet death sentence that the country that issued it no longer exists to carry out. The lesson of Able Archer 83 is not the same as the lesson of Petrov or Arkhipov. Petrov and Arkhipov teach us what one person can do in a single moment of crisis. Able Archer 83 teaches us something different. It teaches us that the most dangerous path to nuclear war is not aggression. It is misunderstanding. Two systems, each one internally rational, each one interpreting the other through a framework that cannot see what the other side actually intends. Ryan did not make the Soviet Union more dangerous. It made the Soviet Union more afraid. And a nuclear power that is afraid, that is convinced the attack is coming, is more dangerous than one that is simply hostile, because hostility can be deterred. Fear cannot. Reagan understood this after Able Archer 83. It is arguably the most important thing he understood in his entire presidency. The Evil Empire speech was designed to project strength. What Gordievsky's intelligence showed him was that strength, projected without understanding, does not deter. It provokes. The gap between what America intended and what the Soviet Union perceived. That gap is where nuclear war lives. Closing that gap is what arms control is for. Closing that gap is what the hotline is for. Closing that gap is what every back channel, every summit, every classified communication protocol between nuclear powers is designed to do. Not because the two sides trust each other, but because the alternative to communication is a world where a military exercise becomes the end of everything. What other declassified stories should we cover next? Drop your suggestions below. There are files that have been waiting decades to be opened. We are just getting started. We will see you in the next classified file.